I'm Barry Shreiar, the president of Army and Navy Academy. Today, I'm here with Dr. Michael Gurian. Michael is the founder of the Gurian Institute, which, of course, our school is honored to be a center of excellence with the Gurian Institute. Michael, of course, is an extraordinarily well-known author. He's written, I think I can get into the dozens of books, a substantial amount about parenting, boys and girls learning differently, the boy brain science, the girl brain science. He is a well-recognized expert on the subject, both from a parenting perspective and from an educational perspective. We use Michael's Institute on a very regular basis here. He is the tip of the spear, if you will, with respect to strategy and technique for the best educational practices at the Gurian Institute, and we are honored to have him today. I thought we'd continue our discussion. Some of the things both in greater detail with respect to what we talked about with the parents, and then, some topics that didn't come up. Actually, I'd like to talk about something that we sort of tangentially struck in our conversation. That is, having a chance for you to speak directly to our boys, which is something that we plan on doing as you come back with your next talk. So we normally talk to the patrons, the adults, the community. And it'd be nice, we all believe that it'd be nice for you to be able to have some sort of direct line of communication with the boys and answer questions that they have. And be able to talk to them about, some of their social and emotional concerns and the things that are going on in the classroom and how they learn. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'd like to have you just sort of briefly describe some of the things that you think you'd really like, especially the Army and Navy boys. And if you know how we do things here, you've been around us for a very long time. Some of the things that you think they need to hear.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing I would talk to them about is screen time, cell phones, extra cell phones, the amount of time, the toxicity of it for their brains. I want to, really talk to them about it. That will include talking to them about porn, everything related to screens, gambling addictions, just all of it, because it's so in their face, even the ones here, either when they go home or, so that's a big theme when I talk to the young guys. I definitely talk to them about that. And then I like to sometimes show the scans of how males do emotive stuff and how females do emotive stuff, and to try to, and then it can create a discussion with the boys about the fact that the way they're doing their emotive stuff is probably fine, but at the same time, they could tweak it. Like they could, under the right circumstances, they could concentrate on when they feel safe and with a person that they feel safe with, and then maybe share, more of their deeper emotive life. So I like engaging with them on that. Like I've always liked having teenage clients, female and male, as a therapist. I've always just find that they're ripe and ready to hear more about how to do it, as long as the stance is that they're okay. Like there's nothing wrong with them because they don't talk about things like their sister does. Nothing wrong with them. So, to kind of create that safety, you're okay. And so that's another theme I like to engage them with. And they actually, I find, especially if the circle's sort of small, guys will share, what's going on emotionally. Just sort of can't have a massive circle. Won't be another great theme. Well, I like talking to them. I would like to talk to them about, show them some scans and talk to them about sort of evolutionary biology and how the male goes and the broad spectrum of what is male. Like to talk to them about the sensitive boys, kind of comparing so they can have empathy, for the more sensitive boys. And yet, so the sensitive boys can also have more resilience. That's a theme I like to talk about. So that's kind of what's coming to me. And then, of course, whatever you all wanted me to, I would do.
You say oftentimes that right around 7th grade or so, which is when we start here, boys are really ready to really hear all of this. We like to say on this campus that, the boys are ready for more. It's almost shocking to a lot of people how capable they can be if, we sort of hold them back and potentially, or we make them over secure. And we don't really give them credit for the amount of really adult information they can process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we want to speak to them to mature them up. So definitely want to think, look, if you're in 7th grade, you can talk about sex. You're thinking about sex. Okay, then anything goes, right? I mean, then you can learn about anything. If you have reached the age of maturity when we need to teach you anything. So 7th grade's a great time, yeah.
Let's do some topical subjects that, you and I maybe we talk about outside of, just the regular discourse that you have with parents. We have some, very topical issues now in the news with shootings, whether it's school shootings or assassinations and the like. And, boys' brains are processing this. And, even either from a school perspective or the parent perspective, what are your thoughts on the discussions with these young adults and working through a process with them on these topics?
Yeah, I think we as adults got to do the who, what, where, when, how, why, like the whole thing with them. An example would be a Charlie Kirk, right? But so as not to be political, you could look over at the Josh Shapiro, getting his house with his family in it getting burned. I mean, so that you're on both sides of the political spectrum, because it's not necessarily a political thing. It's violence is being done to people who are leaders, and it's in the news a lot. And what's not in the news is the violence that's being done to people every day. People are being killed, arsonists, all these things are going on every day. They're just not in the news because they don't happen to leaders. So that violence is going up in our society. I know in some cities murder rates have gone down, which is great. But we look at the amount of violence we have now compared to 50 years ago, and boys have to learn about it. And most of the violence not all, is committed by young males, or males. So I would like to talk to them about it. And I think all of us as adults should do it. And so we use that kind of who, what, where, when, why, how structure. We can talk about it. We can talk about Charlie Kirk. We can also talk about gang violence. We can talk about drug induced. We can talk about it all. And it's a topic they need to hear. They need to talk about desensitization. Like someone who's gaming violent video games, 5-6 hours a day. Okay, that's affecting the brain. I'm not saying that guy's going to go kill someone, but that brain's being desensitized to violence. Or Grand Theft Auto. I haven't looked at it in a while, but when I was studying it for my book, I mean, that was just misogynistic and violent against women, and that's got to be talked about because there's a desensitization. So I think it's probably a topic that should come up in every generation, but I think in our generation, especially given all the violence these guys are seeing everywhere, internet, YouTube, everywhere, movies, streaming, we should be constantly in conversation with them. Okay, violence, what's the difference between violence and aggression, and okay, why did that happen? Who did it happen to? How did it happen? So that they're engaged.
It's an interesting point you make too, because, we oftentimes sort of mask the conversation in positioning it in a place. It belongs here, there's evil knows no party. Right. And when you talk about violence, it's just that. But we'll go off on a tangent and say we're going to position it. No, it's over here or it's over there.
Right.
That's not the discussion. The discussion is you strip those things out and say, taking that gun out, or, the idea of spending so much time on Grand Theft Auto, it does desensitize you to this kind of conduct. We have to talk about the fact that, especially in a campus like us where we talk about virtue, the difference, right? And we have to discuss it. We need it. And that all it does is give us a context for it, which I think, because it becomes very three-dimensional. It's real. And it does give us an opportunity to do it. And we shouldn't squander the opportunity to understand how to get our boys centered back to, where the lines are drawn for conduct. And don't be fooled by this idea of, well, it was them or us or this. It doesn't, none of that is germane. The conduct itself has an evil nature, and it needs to be discussed in that manner.
Yeah, and I love you're tying it back to virtue because then it fits within this system so well. And I also I think that we miss when it goes down a narrow lane, like, it's all leftists are doing it, or it's all right, or whatever. When it goes down those lanes, which I think you're referring to, what we forget is that from a clinical point of view, what we have is mentally ill people who, most of them male. We have a culture that doesn't understand male mental illness, doesn't try to help. Like, we invest almost nothing in mental health, and we have a lot of mentally ill people. And so we're not working for a cure. And then this mentally ill person, and people may argue about the words mental illness, but at least is clinically depressed, which is a mental illness, has access to weapons. And I think that's something we got to talk to these guys about, because some of them may have access to weapons. And we got to talk to them about it and go, okay, violence is an illness, actually. It's an AMA, right? It's an illness for about the last 30 years. It's in the DSM. So violence is an illness. That puts it clinically. Then virtue and evil puts it in the virtue. And we can work in both spheres with these guys to hopefully help them to see, and also help them to monitor each other. If a kid is veering off into that mental instability, the way the male brain is set up, our impulse control ain't great, and we can override, and we don't control the impulse. And we've talked this everywhere about frontal lobe involvement and executive decision making. And you get a clinically depressed male, his brain is not overriding the violent impulse, and his brain is looking for the dopamine hit, and the violent impulse is the dopamine hit. So I also connect it to mental health. And I think the big challenge for us as a culture is we have to come to grips with mental health and male mental health. Female too, but in the case of violence, it's mainly male mental health that we're not taking care of.
So then what's your advice to teenage boys on how they are counseling boys that they know are starting to slip, starting to fail, that need more attention? Is it something that they should be doing more on a personal level? Like, they think that they should be sitting down and having that discussion, or is it outreach and intervention with other people to help them? But
well, yeah, these are kids, so they're going to have to go to the psychologist, and get help. They gotta, think of an 8th grader, who tried to counsel, and then the other one commits suicide, because suicide is violence. It's violence from depression. So then how they feel, their friend dies, they blame themselves. So I do think they should go find the professionals, as soon as possible if they see something, and the folks that are above, the leaders, got to coach them and train them to go to those psychologists, because sometimes they can just tell that the guy is just fading, right? Something going on, and he's probably not sleeping. He's probably on devices, and he shouldn't be. He's probably not eating well. He's isolating, and so those are the signs, and then that can become depression and violence. So I would want to see intervention.
So the idea of really getting boys to feel comfortable, it's not like you're telling on somebody. It isn't something, for one boy to look at another and say, I can help, you need help with your emotions, or your ability to track violence. It's a pretty difficult thing for a young man to do.
Oh, yeah.
But we do have to actually, to your earlier point, culturally, we have to make more space for that.
And luckily the NFL and, these various sports folks so it's on YouTube. So teachers can show kids those clips, of famous people, Steph Curry, or famous people who are talking about male mental health, and about mental health. And here are the signs, or that kind of thing. So it's different than 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And now these kids respect those people, and those men are talking about mental health. So I think that's an asset that didn't exist 15 years ago. I think, brotherhood, taking care of each other. I think of the Socratic virtue, or go all the way back to virtue in wartime. And what is that? How do you take care of your brothers? That's part of virtue. And I think that's part of this, we take care of each other. If someone is hurting, we take care of them.
Right.
And it's not tattling or anything. And I think your culture's kind of, your people they get that. I think your boys get that.
Well, we spend time, what we call TAC time, right?
Right.
Our TAC officers are training advisors, counselors. So we call them, the acronym is TAC. But they spend time with their boys, pretty much every night when they're on campus. And for, a short period of time, it might be 15 minutes, might be a half hour to talk as a group and really do something that you don't see in other places, right? Because boys have a chance to express some of these thoughts in a way that they would never do in a different environment. They'd feel safe.
Right.
They know that they can share with each other. No one's making fun of them. And they're in a very male environment, right? But they recognize that this is an environment where these things are perfectly okay. And it allows them to be more open to saying, hey, this is someone who we know needs more help. Let's express it so they can find it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it's an opportunity that we don't want to squander, because it's exactly what you're saying. We're paying more attention to, sometimes the discussion is just about what's going to happen tomorrow, right? But oftentimes these conversations are going to come up, and there's a real opportunity for the boys to start talking about it in a setting that, like I said, that they know is not overly judged. They're comfortable. It's actually pretty good that there's no girl in there to think that they're, that they're either not manly enough or too manly.
Right.
Right. It's just a very safe place where they can really start to figure out how to develop a habit so that when they get into a relationship, just that you and I have talked about it before, that that boys that come from these environments, all boys military boarding schools, turn out to be very emotionally well set for their relationships going forward. And you'd think that's contrary to what you might expect, but
yeah, it is a really interesting finding. Because not everything will apply to every boy and all that, but it's still an interesting finding that, and I think the logic of it is true, that if you take girls out, then no one is doing the emotional work for the boys. They have to do their own emotional work. And then if you create the safe environment, like what I call the safe emotional container, let's say, and I think for most boys, this is a safe emotional container. And so, yeah, I think the finding actually makes sense. But you're right. It goes contrary to sort of an academic tenet that started maybe 50, 60 years ago, which is boys aren't going to do emotions or males aren't going to do emotions if females aren't involved, right? That males don't do emotions with each other. But that's never really true. If we go back to the military, those brotherhoods fought with each other. They were very emotional, and like poetry came out of them and arts came out of them. It was very emotional, and they supported each other emotionally, and they were all each other had emotionally. But that tenet was kind of a thing that came out 50, 60 years ago from academe, and everyone bought it. And is there a depth of emotion that an individual boy can get by working with his mom or his sister or his girlfriend? Yeah, there's depth there, absolutely. So it's great to have those people, but to say that boys won't be emotional if they're only with each other, that was incorrect. And in fact, the findings are that it's just the opposite, that they will because they have to. And I do think the brain is sort of wired to interact emotionally, social emotional. So if the container is set up for them to do it, they'll do it. If there's someone stomping it down in that container, then they'll isolate emotionally. So, and luckily here, I did that white paper in that study, and I really didn't hear people talking about, maybe there's some isolated person, but basically this is a system that is open to male emotionality. And so, yeah, I think the guys, when they need it, they need it. And when they don't need it, they don't need it. They don't always have to be gushing.
That's right. And you made a great point, I think, too, that, that it's my antithetical, but the military component does breed incredible depth of emotion and relationship
Mhm.
for young men, for
Oh, yeah.
boys, right? And it's meant to.
It's part of how it makes them into men.
Right, right. And so it actually, I think, increases the emotional bonding, not
It
decreases
does.
it, as popular, I think popular myth might say it might.
Right.
And it simply doesn't. I mean, you see it all the time.
Right.
And if it's, again, if it's nurtured, if you talk about it and make the boys just really better understand what that means, it's something they take with them. They abstract it throughout the rest of their life. And it really does give them foundation, right? Structure, habit, lifestyle.
Lifestyle. That's a brilliant Barryism. Structure, habit, lifestyle. I love it.
Listen, you travel around, you are constantly in touch all around the world. You're getting ready in January to put together a very, very large conference, which includes the best of brain science, boy and girl. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, what you're trying to accomplish there. This is not happening until January, but I think it's fascinating that we're able to put together a group of people and do something with this level of depth. This is going to be a few days worth of serious in-depth discussion with the best of the best. I'd love for you to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the What Boys Need as Males italicized. What Boys Need as Males italicized conference. And the subtitle is A Global Conversation on Raising Boys into Men in the, in the 21st century. And it grew out of a conversation I was having with Paul Golding. So Dr. Paul Golding is the head of the Santa Fe Boys Fund, previously the Santa Fe Boys Educational Foundation in Santa Fe. And he's had me come out there do Helping Boys Thrive. So we were talking, and he was saying, I think it was initially him who said, there's a lot of conversation in the culture about manosphere or, and a lot of it becomes anti-male, males are bad, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm really concerned with males. What's happening to male development? And of course, as you know, that's my male and female development, nature. I'm really interested in that. And so just immediately we created this idea. I mean, within 5 minutes, I think, we said, and I suggested the title. I said, well, what if we did What Boys Need? I think he said, let's do something on What Boys Need. And then I said, and what about as males, italicized? And we were both, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And then we decided to make it global because it's on Zoom. So we thought, well, we can actually get other voices, right? Not everyone's flying to one place. So there isn't a cost thing. And he's sponsoring, for the most part, sponsoring it. So we're keeping it free. So then we started reaching out. And in fact, some of the reach out was right here to Army and Navy to try to get some of the young Asian guys. Because I was looking at, should I get an Asian speaker, and then this conversation started. And Dr. Fletcher had the idea, let's get Asian guys from Army and Navy to talk about what boys need from their point of view. And then we have Nigerian, a South African, Indian, East Indian, so Hispanic. So we're getting people from other cultures. And then, yes, we have a lot of the key players that would be known as boy experts, like I myself is one of them. John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. John Gray, Warren Farrell, who wrote The Boy Crisis. Michael Thompson, Raising Cain. Christina Hoff Sommers, who wrote The War Against Boys, which is a really great book back 20-some years ago. She's really great. And then Leonard Sachs, another example, Boys Adrift. So I was able to get a lot of them. And so I think that's really great because it's actually hard to get all of us together because usually we're speaking somewhere separately. And this is trying to get, and then we have just all sorts of other incredible speakers. I think we have 24 speakers over those 4 days, some pre-recorded. So if people are interested, you just go to helpingboysthrive.org. That's the website. And maybe you'll link to it, but helpingboysthrive.org, people will see it right away.
Right. And it's going to be on YouTube, right?
Yeah, everyone's going to be taping. We're doing it all as part of the conference. So nothing's going to go before the conference because we wanted it all to be together as a conference where we're having this conversation. Yeah. And then later we'll get it on YouTube.
Okay. I think it's spectacular because it's, like I said, there's so much depth to it. The the professionals you mentioned, Dr. Amon is going to be there.
Oh yeah,
About brain
Daniel
students
Amen. Yep.
and there's so much. I mean, you've really got much of the dream team. I mean, you really were the inception to this discussion 30 some odd years ago. And then you started to find kindred spirit, right? through the Michael Thompsons and and Leonard Sachs and Christine Hoff Summers. So, it's there's a cadre of you that have been talking about this. You've never been marginalized. You did the entire circuit of all these morning shows and various things like that. I think there was always this groundswell of saying, yeah, I really think that's the case, right? And what you were able to do is provide some real scientific heft in the discussion, right? So it couldn't be marginalized. It couldn't be. So yeah, that's just boy stuff. People want to support boy things. So.
Yeah, no, that's true. I was having a conversation with John Gray about this, and I was saying because John Gray's book Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus came out in '92, I believe. I think I have that correct. And then My Wonder of Boys, I was writing it, and then it came out in '96. And Wonder of Boys was sort of the beginning of it all. There was no big book, on boys yet. That was the first one, and then all sorts of others followed. And I said to John, you really, if you hadn't, written and made Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus so popular and so acceptable to people, I said, I don't know. Like, I went the science route, absolutely, but I don't know. I think you broke ground for me, I said to him. And he was appreciative of that. And then he said, yeah, but you're the one who put the science to it.
Right.
And I thank you. He said, so it was like a mutual love fest. And it's true, because if one follows John Gray's career, the last 10 to 15 years, he has mastered brain science. I mean, that guy is really smart.
Yeah.
And, that's what he's going to be talking about at our conference. I mean, he's talking the science.
Right.
And I did ask our speakers to please, they're going to do their themes, but like Daniel, I'm going to ask Daniel Amen, Dr. Amen, I'm going to interview him for this, and we're going to be talking about male mental health. And, he definitely takes a brain. He's all about the brain. Leonard Sachs is going to do motivation from the brain, and so people are going to spend a good amount of time on male brain. They're really into it. And I think, and John Gray is he's always leading the way in a way. And I was really heartened when he said that.
Yeah. I think you are right, though.
He's into it.
He made it acceptable to talk.
I think so.
I mean, literally created this that we actually use as part of our vernacular.
Right.
Well, men of are, right. Remember, right? And that was great, because you brought it to the public's sort of the general the discourse in public, and it was acceptable to start talking about these differences. And then you came along and said, and yeah, by the way, let me give you some foundation for that. Let me explain it.
And especially in child development. I kind of moved it into child development initially. Yeah. I think we all work together.
Right.
I've been thinking back on it. I'm older now, and I think back on my career, and I think I was talking to Paul Golding when we were setting up this conference about how it's unfortunate when people silo, when they, like I think about the women's movement. I know there was some siloing, but I think the women's movement, there's a lot of working together and networking. And so everyone was lifting each other up. And then this movement spread. Like the women's movement, obviously is a much more massive movement than our boys' movement. And I think one of the reasons the boys' movement is not as massive, let's say, is that a lot of people silo and don't work together. And some of it's competitiveness, some of it's making a living. It's just siloing to me. And so I really want to try to get everyone working together, because I think the boys movement could use that. I think we have to not silo, because if we silo, to some extent, we're repeating each other.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent,
right.
Like I'm seeing people writing books and they're just kind of a copy.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, all right, great. I'm so glad you're doing that. Kind of a copy. And then maybe they feel that way about me. And so we're not like necessarily working together. So I really am always hoping that we'll work together, because I think the boys movement is poised. I think it can grow, and I think it needs to grow. I think it needs to grow bigger, because, for instance, if it grows bigger, we're going to have more boys' schools.
Yeah.
I really think so. I mean, boys' schools are a good thing. Co-ed, good thing. And boys' schools, good thing. We need some heft in the culture to say to people, yeah, build a boys' school. That's good. We want a boys' school. Right now, right, there isn't as much of that. We're still battling against people saying, well, if you put boys together, they're a bunch of bad people, right? There's still that battle. And I'm like, what? But it's out there because to some extent, I don't think we have a big enough movement supporting boy-only environments or boy-supportive environments. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah. It's funny. I think there's a reaction to, well, build more boys' schools. Well, then wouldn't you say build more girls' schools? And your position has been, well,
Sure.
the ones you've got right now are already girls' schools, right? I mean,
I see.
They're built so much toward that type of learning in that brain that they're already out there. But what about this idea of creating an environment? And again, I think there's this public perception is, oh wait, that's going to just expand this notion of male toxicity. If you build more boys' schools, isn't that what it is? It's a male toxic environment. And of course, you've dispelled it, and I think clearly on our campus you'd say the exact same thing. That's just not the case, and no one's ever met one of our boys, walking around this town or on our campus or going home for the weekends or whatever, is saying that about any of these kids. It's much the exact opposite.
Yeah, when I hear someone talking about male toxicity or any of that, I just tune out. I mean, I just know that they're not in the conversation.
Yeah,
they picked up something from social media, or they picked it up from academe. They were just in college or grad school or something, and they picked this up, and they've decided that is the theme, and it's not the theme. Their masculinity is not toxic, and it's just like creating a straw man and then arguing about the straw man. So, right. And that's part of why. Okay, so back to the conference. That's part of why Paul and I said we're going to say to our speakers, that's not a topic we're covering. So if you need to cover that, don't speak at this conference. We're not doing toxic masculinity or any of that. We're doing male development.
Yeah.
And it allows us to really focus. And from that point of view, then I think we start saying boys' schools, great. And by the way, girls' schools, great.
Yeah.
I mean, I love girls' schools. And if you look at girls who come out of girls' schools, a lot of them are senators, reps. I mean, good leaders. So girls' schools are great. And then to your point, yeah, most public education or even a lot of private education that's co-ed is much more female brain education than male brain. So luckily there are a lot of girls' schools. There are less boys' schools, and I'd like to see more, right? To give boys a place and to give their families a place.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that charter school movements have tried out boys-only charter schools and girls only.
Right.
But and some of them are successful. Some of them are like, wow, like Dr. Fletcher, Glenetta Fletcher, who people here will know. She'd be a great one to have on the podcast if you haven't. Have you had Dr. Fletcher or Fletch on this podcast?
We haven't. Next time she's here, she's going to.
She's so fascinating.
She
ran through LA Unified. She was involved in a charter and boy only, and she did her dissertation on it. And so those charter schools, some of them are boy only or girl only, and I think that's good. Let them do that because a lot of the kids who are going to be in those charter schools, that boy only environment, they can get mentoring, they can get, often they are raised without fathers, but in that boy only environment, they're getting more male bonding, more of that. And that's good for the brain. So obviously I'm a fan.
You're a fan. I think it's, from a public perception, most of all, I think it's a pretty difficult sale, right? For even charter schools, you don't see very many of them.
Right.
For these reasons. I mean, charter schools struggle to begin with because of all sorts of issues. But it's difficult to do that level of segregation and get people to be comfortable with it. Which I think is part of the reason that, people who have obviously read any of your work or the group of people, for instance, that you'll have in January, they recognize it. They say, hey, we have to seek it out. We got to go find it. Because there's real benefit in it. And then when they actually see it play out, there's all the evidence they need.
Right.
You and I talk about this a lot. I say to you, it's really, this is just the laboratory for what Gurian Institute is talking about, certainly with respect to boys and developing young males.
Yeah.
Because we want to see what works and what doesn't. It's still a pretty constant challenge because there's a groundswell, a big one that says this is not what we're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. We could get our boys movement to kind of be a groundswell too, like to push against that. Because you're right. I mean, the headwinds grow out of a political mindset that got entrenched, that was basically anti-male.
You talk about that in Rescue Plan.
Yeah, Boys a Rescue Plan. I cover that, and man, it's really interesting to watch from an evolutionary perspective, to watch how, for a while, one sex, female, was downgraded.
Yeah.
Right. And now the pendulum swung so that now male is downgraded. And from an evolutionary perspective, to try to understand why must that happen? And we all have theories, but that's where we are. We're in the time where now male is downgraded to compensate for the fact that for hundreds of years, female was downgraded. Right. Which is true. She was. So now I just hope this doesn't last, 1,000 years, because civilization is born on the backs of males. It doesn't mean it's not born on the backs of females. It is. But if you got all these underperforming males, this is bad for a civilization. From an evolutionary perspective, we do not want that. We do not want 9 to 14 million, whatever the number is, of males who have stopped looking for work. Like, that is not good for a society.
Right.
And so, anyway, it goes off on a tangent, but I do worry about all these underperforming males. And I worry about how we've downgraded them, and they just recede. They just isolate. They get into places in the internet we don't want them to go. They just isolate. They're depressed.
Yeah. And
bad.
They get very lonely.
They won't date. So that means they're not going to bond, which means we're not going to be reproducing. I look at everything from an evolutionary perspective. So like, okay, that's not good. What are we at? A 1.6? We're not repopulating at 2. We're doing 1.6. That's going to go down to 1.3. I know this all sounds abstract, but over the decades, this becomes bad. All these underperforming males are bad. We just want that.
Interestingly enough, you talk about this sort of population bomb, right? There's this point where these schools just won't have students.
Right.
They'll have to contract because there's not boys, girls, doesn't make a difference. There's just, these students just aren't out there to populate these institutions. I think colleges are very fearful of what that looks like. And by the way, so are private schools. I mean, it's something that you obviously have to be, fearful of. On top of, because I actually, there may be certain other cultural reasons for that, but there's just shrinking numbers.
Yeah,
and you have to be aware of it, and you have to live with it. That's something we think about and talk about constantly. And I know, look, you talk to a lot of people everywhere about these kinds of things. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We get you for a little bit more time here over the next couple of days. And like I said earlier, having you here is always a treat for us because, we like to really explain how the important boy brain science is to us. It's, we do two things, boy brain science and virtue. And you constantly talk about both. And so to have you here and be accessible to all of our constituents is it's a big ice cream sundae.
So well, for me too. Thanks for having me.
Coming at you with spoons.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for being
Thank you. Yeah. Good man. Good school. Thanks, everybody.